Good afternoon. My name is Gillian Balaban and I am Senior Coordinator Governance Relations at GRI. Welcome to this meeting of the Global Sustainability Standards Board, known by its acronym, the GSSB, held on 20 April 2023. This virtual meeting is being hosted from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Please note that all public GSSB meetings are being recorded, and you can find the audio recording on the GSSB webpage, along with the high-level summaries of previous GSSB meetings. Present from the GRI Secretariat today are Margarita Barbieri, Manager Standards, Bastian Buck, Chief of Standards, and Matthew Dunn, Manager Standards. We will now start a roll call. Corley LaRue.
Present.
Thank you. Chalandra De Silva.
Present.
Deborah Ing.
Present.
Thank you. Galia Tunskova.
Present.
Ganga Charan Sharma.
Present.
Julia Genuardi.
Present.
Jennifer Prinsing.
Present.
Jeff Robertson.
Present.
Joseph Martin.
Present.
Laura Dana Carter. Laura Dana.
Oh, sorry, present, sorry.
Thank you. Peter Colley.
Present.
Vincent Kong.
Present.
Thank you. Anna Nefedova.
Present.
Thank you. And GSSB Chair Carol Adams.
Yes, present.
Thank you, everyone. GSSB member Kim Schumacher will join shortly. I'll now hand over to the Chair, Carol Adams, to open the meeting.
Thank you very much, Gillian, and good day, everyone. Very nice to be here with you all. I think if we could start by going to the agenda, please. We're just going to swap around the discussion on climate change with the one on economic impacts, as we may have one or two people that have to leave a little earlier than the end. And we'll probably take up most of the 2-hour session with the public meeting this time, as we have some additional important business to discuss. And so the next slide, please. I'd like to warmly welcome Deborah, who's our new investment institution constituency person, joining us for the first time at this meeting. Deborah, would you like to say a few words about yourself and why you chose to join the GSSB?
Sure. Hi, and well, hello, everybody. It's great to be here. By way of background, I spent about 18 years at a Canadian pension plan, Ontario Teachers. The first 8 of that was in asset allocation, investment strategy, but the last 10 or so years was really heading the responsible investing initiatives there. During that time, was involved with the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark on the Real Estate Benchmark Committee, and then on the infrastructure side, we were part of the group of founding asset owners that brought in the infrastructure standards into GSSB, and I've been involved either at the advisory board or at the full board level since that time. I recently joined GMO, which is a Boston-based asset management firm, also heading responsible investing activities there. I'm very excited to be part of the GRI. I've been involved with SASB, obviously a lot of competition between GRI and all the other standards. But what I have observed is that many corporations out there adopt GRI standards quite readily, and really like the idea of taking a much broader view of sustainability beyond immediate or more direct financial materiality, because I believe that eventually all of these things will become material. And look forward to learning from the rest of the board and being able to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we're very happy to have you with us. And the next item is an update from the Standards Division from Bastian and Laura on the topic standards updates and the update to box 1 in GRI 1 that we circulated. So Bastian, if I could pass over to you, please.
Thank you, Carol, and hello, everyone. Yes, I will keep it very brief today. We had the two-day meeting just a short while ago where there was a chance for the project owners to update you in quite some depth about the different ongoing projects. So if we move through the slides, I just wanted to give a snapshot of where we stand. Next slide, please. We start with the biodiversity project. As you know, this is now past public exposure, and the TCs, so the technical committees, are reviewing and discussing the contents at this moment. Their meeting is scheduled to go through all the detail of it. And we will then see further discussions on the revised draft for June, September, October. The aim is still to have the GSB approval scheduled for this year, and we're eyeing November at the moment to bring this back to the GSB for final approval. For the labor project, we're in the midst of the draft development. This will continue for a while. For the new members, just to say that this is what we refer to as a portfolio project. There are multiple existing standards that form part of that review, and we work in a phased approach. We are aiming to have the first set of draft standards available for approval in the first quarter of 2024. But we will keep you updated around this and when we exactly come to the public exposure. Next slide, please. For the climate change project, which is also on the agenda, as Carol has already, we are trying to implement a very ambitious agenda that would culminate into a public exposure approval draft still this year. We're pooling resources from the whole standards division to accomplish that, and the team is making great strides to actually put this on a timeline for us. And we will keep you updated as we discussed at the last meeting on how successful we are in speeding up these processes without compromising the quality that we are all aiming for. But again, the team is coming together to achieve just that, and they have discussed with the experts already in subgroups and for specific themes, and this will be now expanded also with the approval of the full slate of technical committee members. Last but not least, the economic impact project. There we are really still in the project initiations phase. We had a discussion on this at the last meeting. We will have a discussion today, and we will then move towards project commencement, which is the project proposal that will come to you for first and then second approval. On the sector side, if you move to the next slide, please. For the mining related work, it is important to mention that we will close the public comment very soon. So if you still see an opportunity to advertise the opportunity, please do be in touch with me, the team. And we can provide you with the necessary materials if you want to make introductions. That is very much possible. We see a lot of buzz around this project, that's for sure. It is always hard to pinpoint how many submissions that will translate into, but we're very positive about getting a very significant traction here because the team has stood up together with GI colleagues overall, including in the networks, a whole host of activities to engage stakeholders on this draft content. We're aiming for the approval in November here, and we will keep you abreast of this project schedule as well. For textiles and apparel, we are assessing now the applications to the working group. We had extended the application period, and we're looking now through an interview process to confirm candidates, which we will then present for your approval. And we're looking to have a first meeting in September, and that will really be dependent on the success in recruiting the working group in the coming weeks. So that is something we will also keep you updated as we progress over the second quarter this year. Next slide. For financial services, a somewhat similar picture. We're looking to confirm the technical committee members for the May-June meeting, and and I should have mentioned that for other projects as well, we're on a hiring spree, so we're bringing on new colleagues in the background. It's essential for us to run, in particular, the new sector standards projects now, to have additional people on board, and we're bringing them into the team as we speak. We hope to have first technical committee meetings in September this year, but this is something we will also judge in relation to our hopefully successful technical committee recruitment in the coming weeks. I leave it at that. We will spend more time on specific projects in the next meetings to prepare for key moments in our due process. But we will generally keep this high-level overview at the beginning of the meetings that we have together to give you an idea on how the individual project teams progress the work. Thanks. I'm now moving to the next slide, and I want to just give a brief introductory remark for the work that we are discussing here. As you all know, we are in an ongoing, I think, discussion with the ISSB, the colleagues at the ISSB, and the colleagues at EFRAG, the institution that is charged with developing the standards for the European regulator. They stand up important work in relation to financial risks and opportunities and double materiality in the case of EFRAG, to which the GRI standards will have to relate. That is a need that practitioners have clearly identified for us, that we should present the work that GRI does on impact reporting in relation to other ongoing standard setting efforts and emerging regulatory realities. So we've started a process on the staff level, and it's very important to highlight that this is right now staff level proposing first text. It is not formally yet part of a due process proceeding of any sort, but what we felt is necessary at this point in time is to create the opportunity for discussion on the relation of the different perspectives in corporate reporting with the GSB, importantly, but also with the two parties that are really advancing this at the moment on the global and the regulatory level, that is the ISSB colleagues and EFRAG. And we've put together contents that Laura will introduce in a moment to have initial discussions. We can then decide here at the GSSB level at which point we move this into a formal due process proceeding. But what we want to signal very clearly today and with this effort is that we, in a best possible scenario, can actually develop text that is supported by all parties and can serve as a joint narrative on how we can explain to the practitioners, to the stakeholders, how the different efforts relate. So this is the driver for the effort that we're presenting today. This is a very technical discussion, and Laura will now introduce to you how we have built these contents, what we have drawn on, and what the considerations were, so that we can invite more feedback from you today. Thank you, and I hand over to Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bastian, and hello to all GSSB members. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Good. So just in terms of additional background to what Bastian just explained, as you know, in GRI 1 Foundation, we currently explain the link between sustainability reporting, as GRI sees it, with financial and value creation reporting. And we do this in box 1 on page 9 of GRI 1. And this is essentially the official position that we have in the GRI standards as to how GRI relates to other types of reporting. This text was developed in 2021, which means that it was developed prior to the developments of the ISSB and EFRAG. And now that the two standard setters are very close to finalizing their standards, we thought this would be a good opportunity to have a look at the impact that those developments may have on the text that we have in box 1. And for that, we have prepared a proposed text for initial discussion with GSSB today. As Bastian noted, it is important to remark that this is not the final text that we are proposing for the GRI standards. The aim of this text is primarily to inform the GSSB position as to how the standards relate to the developments of the ISSB and EFRAG. And this text will also be discussed with both the ISSB and EFRAG, as we want to ensure that we agree a joint narrative and that whatever we develop is consistent with the concepts that the two other standard setters have developed. Also, as Bastian noted, important to remark that any changes to the standards will have to move through due process, including public consultation, and whether to update GRI 1 or not remains the decision of the GSSB. So before introducing the proposed text, I would like to first do a recap of the existing text that we have in box 1, and I will also introduce some of the main concepts and definitions developed by the ISSB and EFRAG that have informed the development of the new text. Next slide, please. So here you can see the text of the existing box 1, which you can also find on page 9 of GRI 1. And we also have a summarized version of this text in GRI 3 on page 8. I will not read out the entire text, but I will highlight some of the key messages in this box, which you can see highlighted in yellow. The main messages are that the impacts of an organization can result in financial consequences for the organization. Therefore, understanding the impacts is a necessary first step in determining related financially material issues for the organization. And lastly, the text in box 1 also makes clear that reporting on impacts is independent of the consideration of financial implications, meaning that impacts cannot be deprioritized for reporting on the basis that they are not financially material. Reporting on impacts is relevant in its own right. Next slide, please. So next, I wanted to briefly introduce the main concepts and definitions in both the standards developed by ISSB and EFRAG, and which we have used as the basis for the text that we will be presenting in a moment. So if we start with the ISSB and the concepts that they have developed as part of their S1 standard, first of all, the ISSB is using the same materiality definition as used in the IFRS accounting standards, which is information is material if omitting, misstating, or obscuring that information could reasonably be expected to influence the decisions of primary users of financial reports. When you look at the GRI standards, our definition of materiality is of a different nature. We don't have a definition for material information as such. We have a definition for determining which sustainability topics are material, which are those that represent the most significant impacts. The next important concept is that an entity shall disclose material information about all sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the entity's business model or strategy, and consequently its cash flows, access to finance, or cost of capital over the short, medium, or long term. And when you look at the GRI standards, this is what would actually correspond to our materiality definition, in the sense that this is explaining which risks and opportunities shall be reported on, which are those that could reasonably be expected to affect the entity's prospects. However, these risks and opportunities are not referred to as financially material issues under the ISSB. Materiality applies to the information that needs to be reported for those risks and opportunities. And finally, S1 states that an entity's sustainability-related risks and opportunities arise both from the entity's dependencies on resources and relationships, and from the entity's impacts on resources and relationships. And this is how the ISSB explains the connection between impacts and risks and opportunities. And the connection is that an organization's impacts on resources and relationships can lead to risks and opportunities. Next slide, please. So here we have some of the main concepts that have been developed for the European standards. And as you know, the European standards introduce the concept of double materiality. And double materiality has two dimensions. The first one is impact materiality, which states that a sustainability matter is material from an impact perspective when it pertains to the undertaking's material, actual or potential, positive or negative impacts on people or the environment over the short, medium, and long-term time horizons. And this is in line with GRI's materiality definition. The second dimension is financial materiality. And this one has two parts. The first part defines material information in line with the IFRS definition that we have just seen. And the second part defines material sustainability matters from a financial perspective. And it says that a sustainability matter is material from a financial perspective if it triggers or may trigger material financial effects on the undertaking. And there's also a longer explanation that follows. The ISSB has similar wording for this second part as we have just seen, but as noted, they do not use the language of sustainability matters being financially material. The definition of materiality is at the information level. The European standards also state that in general, the starting point for double materiality is the assessment of impacts. And they also state, in line with the ISSB, that dependencies alone can also lead to risks and opportunities. So as you can see, these new concepts will have an impact on box 1. For example, when we refer to financially material issues in box 1, this is not the language that ISSB is using. And we also don't explicitly mention the concept of double materiality or dependencies. Next slide, please. Good. So next, I would like to introduce the proposed text that the Standards Division has prepared and which aims to take into account the different concepts that we have just seen. And for the benefit of those listening in, I will read the text out loud. So the first paragraph is very similar to the first paragraph that we already have in box 1. And this paragraph explains GRI's approach to materiality. The paragraph reads as follows. The GRI standards enable organizations to report information about the most significant impacts of their activities and business relationships on the economy, environment, and people, including impacts on their human rights. Such impacts are of importance to sustainable development and to an organization's stakeholders, such as investors, workers, customers, or local communities. This perspective is also referred to as impact materiality. It has been adopted in the European Sustainability Reporting Standards as one of the 2 dimensions an undertaking needs to report on, and is expected to see more widespread adoption in regulatory approaches around the world. The second paragraph explains the link between impacts and risks and opportunities in line with the ISSB, and it includes a couple of examples. It says the impacts of an organization can affect the availability, quality, and affordability of the resources and relationships it depends on. Thus, an organization's impacts can result in risks and opportunities for the organization. These risks and opportunities can affect the organization's business model or strategy, and consequently its cash flows, access to finance, or cost of capital over the short, medium, or long term, and hence affect its prospects. For example, an organization's high use of non-renewable energy contributes to climate change and could at the same time result in increased operating costs for the organization due to legislation that seeks to shift energy use toward renewable sources. Or an organization's track record of respecting human rights and promoting gender equality at work helps attract skilled workers and increases the organization's reputation, and thus helps increase customer demand for its products and services. Such risks and opportunities are of importance to existing and potential investors, lenders, and other creditors who are the primary users of this information. Next slide, please. Then the next paragraph is GRI's view that identifying impacts needs to be a prerequisite for identifying risks and opportunities. It says an organization's impacts are thus a source of sustainability-related risks and opportunities for an organization. Most, if not all, of the impacts of an organization will eventually translate into risks and opportunities. Therefore, understanding these impacts is a necessary first step in identifying related risks and opportunities for an organization. And then the next sentence is aligned with both the ISSB and the European standards. And it says an organization's dependencies on resources and relationships are also a source of risks and opportunities for the organization, independent of the organization's impacts. Then the next paragraph introduces the ISSB's approach to materiality. The IFRS sustainability disclosure standards require disclosing material information about all sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect an organization's prospects. Information is material if omitting, misstating, or obscuring that information could reasonably be expected to influence decisions of primary users. This perspective is also referred to as financial materiality. It has also been adopted in the European Sustainability Reporting Standards as the second dimension an undertaking needs to report on, and is expected to see more widespread adoption in regulatory approaches around the world. The next paragraph then introduces the concept of double materiality in line with the European standards. Together, the impact and financial materiality perspectives provide a comprehensive overview of an organization's sustainability-related impacts, risks, and opportunities. These two perspectives are relevant in their own right, as well as complement each other. The combination of the two perspectives is also referred to as double materiality, for example, under the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And finally, the last paragraph aims to clarify that impacts cannot be deprioritized based on the fact that they do not result in risks and opportunities. And it says sustainability reporting with the GRI standards is independent of the consideration of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. It is therefore important for the organization to report on all the material topics that it has determined using the GRI standards. These material topics cannot be deprioritized on the basis that they do not result in risks and opportunities for the organization. Next slide, please. So before we open up for discussion, I wanted to briefly summarize the feedback that we have received from GSSB members ahead of the meeting, and also some of the key points that the GSSB discussed with the ISSB at the last GSSB meeting. So as you remember, at the last GSSB meeting, we had a session with the ISSB to inform the discussion on the GSSB work program. And in that session, we touched upon some relevant items related to the text that we are discussing today, primarily the relationship and the sequence between the two materiality perspectives. This was one of the areas where the ISSB suggested that we need to do further work on together, but some of the points that they made were that from their perspective, the process of materiality is somewhat cyclical, and therefore it is not possible to point to something as a starting point necessarily. And also that a company not only needs to consider its own impacts, but also the impacts of others. Otherwise, risks and opportunities can be missed. There was also some discussion by GSSB members at that meeting, pointing to the fact that all impacts can have a financial impact, whether that is possible to quantify or not, and that if an organization has an impact on stakeholders, sooner or later, that will also have an impact on investors. We have also received written feedback from 3 GSSB members on the proposed text ahead of the meeting. And among the feedback we have received is that there could be some confusion between the statement that we have at the beginning of the box, saying that impacts can lead to risks and opportunities, and then the statement that we have at the end saying that impacts are independent of risks and opportunities. So that juxtaposition could potentially cause some confusion. It was also commented that the existing wording that we have in GRI 1 and GRI 3 makes more clear that impacts can have both an immediate and future impact on financial performance, and that impacts cannot be deprioritized by simply considering a short-term financial materiality lens. Members also suggested to have a simple graph to explain the text more easily, particularly the connection between impacts, risks, and opportunities. It was also suggested to have an example for cases where dependencies alone can lead to risks and opportunities. And there were also a few comments made on terminology, such as on the use of worker or employee or the use of revenue. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Carol, for any questions from GSSB members and to open up the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, for that very clear explanation and the summary from the last meeting, which I did listen to too. I want to give everybody an opportunity to have some input on this, who wants it, because it is really an important issue. So what we're setting out here is how the GRI standards relate to other standards, other ways of looking at things, but also we're really setting out what the standards themselves do. One thing I wanted to just pick up on about the last box. A couple of people mentioned the last box on the last paragraph in this box, and the sustainability reporting with the GRI standards is independent of, and it's not independent of the sustainability related risks and opportunities, it's independent of considering them. And I think that's perhaps an important point there. But does anybody have any views on this text that they would share, please?
Hi, Carol. Just a quick comment. I thought, oh, thank you, Laura, by the way, for the great description there. In the, I want to say, fourth paragraph of box 1, we say that the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards require disclosing material information about all sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect an organization's prospects. When I first read that, my feeling was that it might be a bit overbroad as to ISSB's description, at least in S1. They seem to, and I welcome other comments and thoughts on this, but they seem to really restrict it to primary users. And I don't know if we've defined primary users elsewhere in our document here, but I thought that was worth calling out right at the outset to help the reader distinguish between the ISSB's focus on investors, creditors, lenders, and a limited view, because prospects is obviously a extremely broad word. So that was just one thing that stuck out to me, and I welcome anyone else's thoughts on that.
Yeah, maybe I can clarify on that point. So that fourth paragraph picks up on some of the concepts that are introduced in the second paragraph. So if you have a look at the second paragraph, in the third sentence, we say that these risks and opportunities can affect the organization's business model or strategy, and consequently affect its cash flows, etc., hence affect its prospects. So what we did here is in the fourth paragraph, we just went with the summary, which also ISSB uses, which is to say risks and opportunities can affect its prospects, to avoid having to repeat the entire formulation. And the same goes for the reference to primary users. At the end of that second paragraph, we have the full formulation and scope of users for the ISSB standards. And that is referenced again in the fourth paragraph by saying primary users. But we take it that this connection doesn't come through very clearly, so we need to address that in the text.
Thank you, Laura. That's helpful.
Corley, sorry, just unmuting. Got to get used to this.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Laura. I mean, this is by no means an easy thing to get right, and I almost feel, you know, the more words one tries to put in, the more confusion can result. But just a couple of questions from me. I mean, to pick up on Jeff's point, I agree that I didn't necessarily read, you know, that list of things as being summarized in prospects. But you've now already noticed that might be something to unpack a little bit more. The one thing that I was also thinking, and this goes back to your introduction right at the beginning, about the different approaches at the moment, or the definitions, and just the use of information versus matters. And I think you referred to that when you were running us through the text. It doesn't really come through as strongly in the proposed text, but you know, we should just make sure that when we talk about material information in the GRI context, that it doesn't become confused with information is material in the IFRS context, if that makes sense. And then the last thing was really more a question from my side, in terms of the discussions with the ISSB. I seem to recall, and again, you know, I haven't studied the latest versions of the IFRS draft standards in detail, but there was use of the word significant in some of the earlier drafts. So I wondered if there was any feedback or any indication, because I know that we have reference to significant as well, although that's not a defined concept. Is that something that you anticipate is going to come up, or that we should just be aware of, or not at all? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So that was indeed in the exposure draft that they published last year for consultation. but following the public comment feedback, the ISSB decided to drop the word significant together with risks and opportunities. So now the formulation that they use instead of significant is the one that you see in both the second and the fourth paragraph, where they say the risks and opportunities to report on are those that could reasonably be expected to affect an organization's business model and strategy. So that is now the formulation that they use in replacement of significant risks and opportunities.
Thank you very much, Laura. Are there any other comments? If not, I'd like to go to slide 18.
Carol, can I just ask one question?
Yes, sure.
Laura, one of the concerns I had with the text was actually in the last paragraph, that first sentence. I think Carol did mention that it's the word consideration that probably makes a difference here, but when you say sustainable reporting with the GRI standards is independent of the consideration of sustainable related risks and opportunities, in my mind, that kind of conflicted with the first sentence of the third paragraph. That's number one. But doesn't it also conflict, Laura, maybe just can explain that to me, with GRI 3? Because if you use the GRI 3 standard to assess your material topics, you're using impact severity and likelihood of occurrence, right? For negative and positive impacts, actual and potential. So within that definition of identifying your impacts, and we are also talking about sustainable related risks and opportunities, then to say that the GRI standards is independent of that, doesn't it cause confusion among the reporters? That's part one of my question. The part two of my question is, to circumvent or to mitigate that risk or that confusion, Laura, wouldn't it be possible, or wouldn't it be adept to basically say that the reporting on the GRI standards is independent of the consideration of financial related risks and opportunities? Because then that gives us the opening for sustainable related risks and opportunities as defined by GRI 3 to be still reported under the GRI standards.
Yes, thank you, Chilendra. And I think there is indeed some confusion, and I think that's also part of the purpose of writing this text, to bring a little bit more clarity to the market. So indeed, GRI 3 uses a similar framework as for enterprise risk management, so looking at severity and likelihood, but we do that from the perspective of impacts on others rather than impacts on the enterprise itself. So the methodology and criteria can be similar, but the focus is quite different. And that's the reason why we included that last paragraph in this box 1 to say that even if an impact is not considered financially material by the enterprise, it still needs to be reported as part of the GRI standards. We acknowledge that most of the times, all of the impacts will also have a risk or opportunity to the company, but in the cases where companies fail to identify that link, those impacts still need to be reported as part of the GRI standards.
Laura, that's absolutely what you said. I completely agree. But you mentioned financial related risks and opportunities, right? And if it's financial related, that to me that absolutely makes sense. And I will not have any concerns on that. My concern arises from the use of the sustainable related risks and opportunities in that first sentence of the last paragraph.
Yeah, so that is the wording that the ISSB uses. They don't refer to financial risks and opportunities specifically. They just use risks and opportunities to the entity generally. So that's why we are using that specific wording, but it's definitely one point that we could bring to them for further clarification.
Thank you.
I would agree with Shalendra there. Thank you. It was a bit confusing, and I don't know. I think the financial material would have worked, but now that you've described it as it's done in the context of the IFRS definition, I guess it's not clear as a reader that you're using that definition.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe some, just some tweaking of the word. I mean, I think I like the statement and what we're trying to say, but I think I do agree that it might be a bit, it's a bit roundabout, right? So.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was a helpful discussion. Thank you. Has anybody else got any sort of disagreement with any of the flow of the logic here around where GRI standards fit with this? And can we go to slide 18 in the meantime, please? The next slide, this one. Okay, so I'm hearing nothing. So I'm assuming then that everybody on the GSSB sort of agrees with the logic in box one, and Bastian and I are going to be discussing this with the ISSB next week. And if we go back to the comments that were made at the GSSB meeting in the discussion with the ISSB at the top of that page there. That there were comments around this being cyclical, and a company not only needs to consider its own impacts but those of others. Otherwise, risks and opportunities can be missed. So there was no agreement there to look at impacts as a starting point to this, and I wondered if anybody had any views on that they could share. I've been looking at GRI 3 again, and figure 2 in there with the steps to arrive at the material impacts. The first 3 steps there require wide consideration of activities and business relationships, the sustainability context, and stakeholders. And I think that some organizations use that process or adapt that process also to look at other types or get to other types of risks and opportunities. And I wondered if there were any views on any of this that would help Bastian and I in the discussions next week.
Carol, I think on that, I think Michelle is the one who made this comment, and I was completely in agreement with what he said at that time. I just feel that impacts will result in a financial implication either in the short term or in the long term, and hence impact materiality it is a precursor to financial materiality. I mean, I think I mentioned that at the in-person meeting as well, that my opinion, or just my thoughts, Carol, here is that the financial materiality is actually a subset of impact materiality when you consider the long run. Yes, if you look at the short run, you probably will be able to carve those 2 out, but in the long run, impact materiality will lead to financial materiality. And I think that is already meant, it's already clearly thought about in GRI 3 in box on box 1, page 9 of GRI 3. It clearly states that impact materiality will drive decisions of financial materiality in the long run. I think that text is there per se in GRI 3 as is.
Yeah, I think we are all agreed on that. I haven't heard any dissent to that impacts do at some point lead to financial consequences. Deborah, did you want to say something? Or is it just that you're not on mute?
Oh, I thought I was on mute. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts on this? And how we might reconcile these different views?
Just one quick thought, Carol. I agree with Shailendra's point about kind of the subset description. If we conceive of impact materiality as sort of reporting on all aspects of the organization that have an impact on stakeholders, the investment community is a stakeholder, and so that financial materiality to me would be a subset of the overall impact materiality picture. So again, maybe to your point, Carol, we are all in agreement on that, but I thought that might bear on this discussion with ISSB.
Indeed, and I think stakeholders recognise that. Investors recognise, and so does the ISSB. In fact, that investor returns are dependent on stakeholders and relationships and so on. Julia.
Yes, thanks. I have only a question and a reflection with you that is related to the prioritization of the impact that we put in place. Because when we identify the impact, okay, it's not easy, but it's possible. But when we have to prioritize this kind of impact, especially in terms of financial one, it's not an easy task for the company. I am comparing this kind of thing with the last definition of the EFRAG that has to verify the impact on the cash flow. Sometimes it's not so easy. So I think that the other point also with ISSB could be exactly discuss about that. When after the list of the impact, after the description of the impact, how we prioritize this kind of impact in order to guarantee the comparison between the different companies? Because in terms of impact, we have an history, we have a culture, more or less, and it's a task. But when we compare financial and impact materiality, it's not an easy task in order of prioritization.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Bastian and Laura, do you want to come in? Do you have any questions that you would like the GSSB to consider further on this?
This is Bastian. I don't think I have any question for the GSB at this stage. I think it is very helpful to us that we have general agreement behind the logic that is presented here. And I think that in the end, what we're trying to accomplish here is to address a clearly articulated need by the stakeholders of GRI, but also the stakeholders of the other standard setters, that we need to explain the relation between these different efforts, right? And I think that should be really our guiding principle, also in the interaction with the other standard setters. In the best possible scenario, as I mentioned earlier, we will have a joint narrative here that the organizations can get behind. And that needs to be, I think, our ambition for the next weeks. And as we've shared, there's already scheduled a discussion with the ISB colleagues, with whom we also shared the draft text. We've done the same with the EFRA colleagues who have received it from us, and we will, as soon as possible, also progress the discussions with them. And I think now it's up to us here on staff level to also send you a signal once we have their input. Maybe there's even an opportunity to discuss that actually as part of an upcoming board meeting with representation from the respective institutions. So yeah, we will look at how this develops, but I think it's good to have this as a kickoff here, reconfirmation basically of the basic organizing principle behind all of this.
I agree. It's been very important, and thank you all for bearing with us as we go through this and look at this again, because I think it is important to know that we are in agreement on this. So thank you very much for that discussion. If there is nothing else, I just want to check again. Does anybody have anything else to raise on this before we move on?
Sorry, Carol, just one last point on that. Bastian, maybe one, I'm just throwing this out as a suggestion for consideration. Maybe our stance could be that irrespective of materiality definitions of other frameworks, that impact materiality cannot be deprioritized based on others. Can we say, is it possible to say something of that nature? Because then that brings out the fact that if you do report on impact materiality, at some point of time, you will be able to easily report on the other materiality, financial materiality or double materiality, as the case may be. It's a bit sledgehammer, I know. I'm just wondering whether it can be done in any in any better way.
So I think that obviously we can look at that wording again and it will come back again, but I think you've made an important observation there that this is the starting point, and that all of these impacts will at some point lead to financial consequences in one way or another, directly or indirectly, for the business. There was another point you made there, Chilendra, which I've just forgotten. It's just slipped my mind, that I thought was also really quite important. Could you just go through that, pick that up again?
You mean, Carol, yeah, on how we position ourselves or keep our stance, is it?
That was partly it, indeed.
Yeah.
But there was something else, I think.
Yes, so I was just wondering, Carol and Bastian, whether the way we set ourselves up in box one is to say that, look, we will basically, you will report on impact materiality, irrespective of the irrespective of the material definitions of other frameworks, is what I'm trying to get at. I know that's a bit sledgehammerish, it's very abrupt, but what I'm trying to get at is, because impact materiality ultimately results in a financial consequence or results in financial materiality decisions, that we take the stance that, look, you cannot deprioritize materiality reporting or immateriality impact reporting on the basis of other definitions of materiality. That is what I was trying to get at. And I do understand that sounds very harsh, but maybe there's a way of actually saying that, not being so harsh.
No, I think that's fair enough, and I think we are all agreed on that. So if we could move on now, Corley has said she has to go, but we were going to move on to the discussion on climate, the climate topic next, just in case somebody else has to go. So if we could move
on. Carol, I believe you're muted there, just so you know.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Do we have the right, is Margarita here?
Yes, can you hold
okay
well?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Good afternoon and good morning and good evening to all of you. I'm having a little bit of connection issues, so hopefully you can hear me well. If not, just pause me at any time. So as you remember, last month in the in-person GSSB meeting, you approved the first group of nomination for the Climate Technical Committee. And the purpose today is to receive your approval for the second group of nominations. If you can move to the next slide, please. As we were explaining last time, for this project, we have chosen a programmatic approach for the development of the climate change standard, and this will lead us to address different subjects in the scope of this project into subgroups. These subgroups will be run partially in parallel, ensuring an integrated approach among them. And the reason why we created this subgroup is, from one hand, to allow us to better manage the content development of this standard, and to the other hand, also to allow us to be able to present to you the exposure draft by the end of this year, if the content development goes as planned. So as I highlighted both last time and also in the introduction by Bastian, the speed is not the most important thing. Obviously, our key and primary focus within GRI always remains on the quality and the stakeholder consensus project, but we think we found a good way to ensure both this quality and stakeholder engagement, while also being able to complete the content development within the year. Technical committee composition will go from 13 to 14 members. I have presented the nomination experts. I'm presenting, sorry, the nominated experts in 2 moments, because I presented the first group in March and today the second group for your approval. And the rationale was, when we explained it in March, and it still is, to be able to start the work of the subgroups discussion on emission and energy as soon as possible, as the expertise that were nominated in March mainly has expertise on these 2 subtopics. If we can move to the follow slide, thank you. So as you remember from last time we met in March, I informed you that we were working to receive a labor constituency representative nomination, and that we were working with extra emphasis to find and ensure representation from different regions, especially to find an Africa and Latin America experts to be included in the technical committee. Regarding the labor representative, we have received the final nomination for the labor constituency this week, so I can say that I will be able to formally present it to you in the GSSB meeting in May. And I'm also having multiple conversations with organizations, both from Africa and Latin America, and I'm rather confident that I can come back to you in May presenting at least 1 or 2 good candidates from these regions to be included in the composition of the TC commitment upon your approval. And you will also see in a moment that I'm also building a very good network of organizations that could act and will act as peer reviewers for this project. And this group of organizations also include organizations from these 2 regions. The technical committee nomination that I'm presenting today for your approval includes 3 business enterprises that covers different industries, from the IT to energy to the chemical sector, and 2 civil society representatives with a thematic focus on just transition and human rights related to climate and environmental issues, including also different regional perspective. The position that I'm still filling, as I just mentioned, will be 1 labor constituency representative that will be presented in May, and at least 1 or 2 organizations from Latin America and Africa region to be presented if all the conversation having, and based on the good feedback I have, I feel confident I will be able to present it next month. It's worth to mention that based on where we are now, there is a strong representation from all the constituencies in the technical committee, and we are rather satisfied with all the constituency being well represented within the technical committee. And we have secured 3 GSSB sponsors for this project. So I would like again to thank Anna Nefedova, Galia Sonkova, and Joseph Martin for being able to act as sponsor. And last time we mentioned that Michelle Washer offered to act as a sponsor, but he was rotating off, unfortunately, from the GSSB. So as you saw in the presentation of the nominations, he is now offering and will be, I'm presenting him as a technical committee expert for the project. Next, sorry, I am not reading the chat. I'm seeing some comments popping up. I don't know if we should just finish the presentation because I have only 1 last slide. And
yes,
then
just carry on, yes.
Thank you, Cara. So if we can move to the next slide. So this slide is just to show you, like, since September last year, as I mentioned also in the last meeting, I have spoken to many organizations and experts, and we have secured a collaboration with different organizations, most of which are happy to act as peer reviewers for this project. And among the network and this organization, as you can see in the slide, there are few good organizations also from this region where I'm also putting an extra effort to being able to present nominations, both from Africa and Latin America. And of course, we will cover also other expertise with the networking the group of organization, the network that we are creating here. So I guess that's it from my side. So I will maybe pause here in case there are comments and questions. We saw one in the chat, and happy to.
The chat was Corley agreeing with the technical the technical committee and happy to approve that just before she signed off. Does anybody have any questions of Margarita? And thank you for that presentation, Margarita.
Thank you, Carol.
No questions?
Hi, it's Deborah. I do have a question, and it's because I'm new to the GSSB.
Okay,
is
Deborah.
there any, when we think about sort of the technical groups or the peer reviews, I've noticed that there's no sort of, like the users of the data aren't sort of part of the review process or the technical committee, and I was just sort of, maybe it's a question as to, is there a specific reason why?
Margarita?
Thank you, Deborah. So in the composition of the technical committee, we make sure and we have to ensure that we ensure representation from the 5 different constituencies. So that's what mainly we worked on while composing this group. But if I'm understanding well your question, like you were wondering why we didn't include any final users of the data. Can you elaborate a little bit just to make sure I understood the question?
Yes, that's exactly. And it may not just be related to this particular project, but perhaps it's a question about the technical committee composition in general. You know, a lot of times in my sort of experience and background, you know, exposing the standards or getting feedback from the users of the data is sometimes useful because they're the ones that have to consume it and they have to be able to sort of embed it into sort of their analytics. Obviously, I think there's probably good other stakeholder representation, but it just seemed to be something that was missing, I guess.
I think maybe that's just Deborah that's got cut off there. No, it's me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So could you just explain perhaps then the role of the UNEP FI in that regard, Margarita? They're the investment institution representative. Can they provide that kind of input?
Yes, sure. I also saw that Harold has his hand raised.
Oh, yes.
I don't know,
Okay.
Harold, if you want to react to this.
Yeah, so maybe on the constituencies. So we have these categories constituencies. So I think again to question or have the question to Deborah, and otherwise we could discuss this later on or out of the meeting. But I would say a lot of the users are also now constituency groups like the business enterprises, the civil society organization, of course, also talk on behalf of a lot of groups. The labor organizations talk on behalf of the workers. So what kind of users are we talking about? I think that's one of the questions. UNEP FI is of course more on they are the network organization for all the financial for the full financial sector, you could say. So I think that's also a user group. So there are a lot of user groups in the constituencies, and
indeed
the decision was to have these constituency groups to represent everybody. I think that's the answer to the question. And the TC should be well balanced, both from a regional perspective in the globe as from the constituency perspective.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, no, that's very helpful. And I think that completely makes sense to me. I guess UNEP FI is sort of the, if you will, the investor sort of view, if you will. Is that?
Yeah, well, they state themselves that they represent investors, but the entire financial sector. So they are a networking organization bringing together the different groups, advising exchanging expertise, creating documents, as you know. So I would say it's bigger. It's globally, of course. So that it's not only investors, but of course investors is included. So, and we have 3 people from UNEP-FI in both the TC and in the subgroup. So in that case, we say they are very well, very good represented. And but
Maybe
that was the proposal.
To build on that, on UNEP-FI, exactly as Harold was mentioning, UNEP-FI will be present in all the discussion under the all 4 subgroups of this project, and they also have they're distinguished against other organizations because they're both embedded in the UN system and the financial sector. So we thought it was an extra added value.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
thank you. And Peter Collins just put a note in the chat that our constituency groups are all report users. So thank you, Jeff. Final word before we move to approving the technical committee.
Yes, no problem. Just very quickly, it may be helpful to highlight that this is the second group, and in the first group, which we reviewed in March, there was also, I think, a rating agency representative. It was also from the investment constituency. So maybe by the combination of those 2 groups is where the comments are coming from about the good representation.
Okay, thank you very much. Harold, did you have another point? No, it's thumbs up. Excellent. Okay, let's move to the next slide, please. And the question is now whether we approve the proposed members for the technical committee. Does anybody have any concerns? Okay, there are none, so we'll take that as approved. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Margarita.
Thank you.
And if we could move back now to talking about the economic impacts with Matthew.
Thanks, Carol, and good day to you and to the GSSB members. So, yeah, I'm really happy to have the opportunity to, I think, speak to you today on, as you understand, our revision of GRI's topic standards and economic impact, and look forward to engaging in this discussion. So, very quickly, I think the purpose of today's discussion will really be for me for us to present on and then critically discuss the conceptual framework that we've developed as a way to think about the revision of this series of standards and get the input of the GSSB, which will enable us to, I think, move forward with this project, as Bastian touched on earlier. So we can move to the next slide, please. So just a quick look at what's on the agenda for today's discussion. So as you can see here, the intention will really be to begin by introducing our conceptual framework to the GSSB, along with some of the key concepts and rationale that has informed this framework. And then as part of this, I'll invite feedback and inputs from the GSSB members, should they have any on this framework and on our proposed way forward. We'll then end off with some key next steps in the process as well. We can move on to the next slide, please. So a very quick recap. I did touch on this in our meeting in March, but just to remember that the primary objective of this project is to, at a very minimum, review the content of GRI's economic disclosures in order to ensure alignment with relative international instruments, and then do our best to reflect leading practice in measuring the economic impacts of organizations. So just to keep this in our minds as we go forward, very straightforward as well. So we can move towards the next slide, please. So I won't spend a lot of time on the timeline. I think Bastian did touch on it a bit earlier in the session. But where we're at the moment is that we'll be having our discussion today around the scope of this project. And our intention is then to take the inputs that are provided today, synthesize them, and integrate them into a draft proposal, which we plan to submit in May. And then with the intention to, as Bastian mentioned, submit a final proposal for GSSB approval come June or July. So that's currently what we are working against. So we can move to the next slide, please. Great. So I think moving on to the framework itself. So I think as touched on in the previous session, our intention as the topic standards team was basically to develop an effective organizing framework for us to then think about how organizations' actions and activities can impact the economy. So this framework here that you see here is what we have developed, and it's been informed both by the various research activities that we've conducted, as well as direct stakeholder engagement over the last weeks and months. So essentially, what you would see here are a set of core overarching themes that we believe should be considered when thinking about an organization's impact on the economy. These are numbered 1 to 5. And within these, we have then included some of the subtopics or elements which we'll use to think about how impacts would manifest within an economy, and some of the indicators that we would need to consider to measure these impacts. So this is still a work in progress, but essentially what we wanted to do when designing this was think about the best way that we could look to accommodate our existing portfolio of economic standards from GRI 201 to GRI 207, but also allow this to remain flexible enough in the instance where we would like to include additional issues or disclosures that may already be in the pipeline or that we expect to have come up in future. So hopefully this does this, but as I mentioned, the purpose is really to source your inputs and your critical feedback on this. So just how I'd like to proceed with the remainder of the session. What I'd like to do is go through the key thematic areas that you can see here, so numbers 1 to 5, and provide additional context and some rationale around why we have proposed this. And then at each stage, I'll stop, and I'd like to just get a sense from the GSSB members, should they be willing to provide input, is whether or not this theme is relevant and for this topic and should be considered. And as well as any additional inputs you may have noted, which you feel key for us to consider going forward. I'll also perhaps bring up some more specific questions just as prompts, and around which we would appreciate your input on as well as we go forward. So that's how we'd like to proceed, and yeah, very much looking forward to the discussion. If there aren't any burning questions at this stage, then I'll just dive in to the next slide. So we can, right. So I think starting off with goods and services, so you would have seen this as one of the first themes and one I'd like to touch on. So I think at a very high level, part of the thinking here is that the consumption of goods and services produced by an organization can invariably add significant value to an economy, firstly by improving people's overall well-being, but also at enhancing the productive capacity of an economy. So in terms of positive impacts on the economy, that's how we see goods and services fitting in. But on the opposite side, I think it can also be seen to be true that where people are unable to access or use certain goods and services produced by an organization, this may then have negative impacts on their well-being and on the capacity of an economy. So it's just to consider both the positive and negative sides of that. I think it's worth noting that goods and services currently aren't dealt with directly within the GRI standard. So this is one that is still very much at a conceptual level for us, but one that we thought may be well positioned here just because of the impact that the final consumption can have, as I just described. So I want to just stop here and then open up to the floor. And if there aren't any direct comments or questions, I'll dive into the questions that we see here.
Matthew, I think I just dropped I've probably communicated this as well earlier, but when you said the negative impacts, shouldn't you also consider the negative impacts of certain goods and services that can be provided? You spoke about the positive impacts and the negative to be that of not being able to access those goods. But there could be goods and services which are actually negative in nature, say tobacco, whatever. Yeah. Now, we will probably need to include that as well as part of the negatives, right?
So correct. I remember you made this comment, Julinda, and I think it's an interesting one. I guess your comment that you submitted was that as long as the goods and services, or that we focus the scope purely on economic impact, right? Because consumption of goods and services could have other impacts which aren't directly related to economic impact. So as long as we retain the scope around purely economic impact, then I don't see why that shouldn't also be considered here. So I thought that was a good comment that you made when you submitted your email. So that has been considered, yeah.
Okay. And also, I think there'll be regulations, and in various countries of the world, Matthew, there'll be various regulations and bans, for example, on certain types of goods and services, or how they're controlled in the sale of it. For example, in Sri Lanka, you can't sell tobacco without having pictures of very gruesome pictures of lung cancer and mouth cancer on the packets of the cigarette, on the packaging. So maybe now that kind of packaging requires a little bit more, say, economic, or I would say more financial implications on the packaging, and the cost of the good increases. So those also will then form impacts with regard to this topic.
So that would be more disclosures around, whether a good or service that you provide is regulated or falls under the jurisdiction of a certain regulator, and kind of disclosing who that regulator is, for instance. Okay, understood. Thanks, Chilindra. Are there any more comments or questions from the group? Otherwise, I have a few myself.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Carol. So yeah, so my next question was more just around these impact channels, and by impact channels, I really am referring to indicators. It's at this stage just a first take for us on what these could look like and the direction these could go. But my question was around the pricing of goods and services. So I think this is something that for us came up as potentially relevant to consider as part of this theme of goods and services, given that pricing is a key channel to restrict access to a product, for example, but can also have a significant impact on the extent to which people are able to consume goods and services. So this was something I think that can fit in different places, but it was just a question around whether this does make sense to be considered here as well. So around perhaps a pricing approach, or the pricing levels of certain goods and services relative to other comparable prices set by other organizations in the market.
I'm not hearing any comments. Matthew, had a little bit of trouble thinking about that, what that indicator could look like. I mean, I gave the example of HIV drugs in South Africa, for example. There were and the pricing of those. But are we talking about particular goods that are really needed, or are we talking about just a general description of pricing policy?
Thanks, Carol. Yeah, so I mean, I think it is a tricky one, but I think the thinking here was really I think a good example is kind of the impact that pricing can have on access and usage. So the extent to which it can be exclusionary. So if you're thinking about markets in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, and with high prevalence of HIV rates, if you are pricing certain goods and services in a band that is exclusionary, this can have quite significant impacts on the well-being and productive capacity of the people in that economy. Similarly, if we're talking about financial goods and services, if these bans are priced in a way that indicates a monopolistic position, then again, you are preventing individuals from accessing these goods and services, which can actually go a long way to helping them participate within an economy. So how this looks, I'm not sure, but the idea and the concept of pricing levels and the extent to which they can impact access and usage of goods and services, I think, was something that we just wanted to test.
I do think it's important. I mean, I do think there have been cases where, you know, pharmaceuticals in particular have been challenged for the pricing of particular drugs in certain countries.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it's worth considering. Anybody else have any views on that?
Yeah, I think Matthew and Carol it'll also have some kind of overlap on the anti-competitive behavior, right? Or at least it'll set context to that disclosure. So I think that there is a linkage between pricing and GRI 20, I think 5 if I'm mistaken, 6, yeah.
6, correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Julian. And I mean, I think it's just agreed. I think there will be a number of overlaps, so it'll just be about how we can, I guess how we can make these as discrete as possible, keeping in mind that sometimes it's just not always possible to do that. But that's noted. Thanks.
Matthew, it's Kala. Maybe rather a pricing strategy for different groups of people, not because pricing in many industries it's a confidential, the margin that you will use to different customers and consumers, but strategy to have affordability and to reach different groups from society is rather here. Then in general, pricing is very confidential. We are not able to disclose the margins and why we give X percentage to this customer and why to other, at least in the FMCG.
Excellent, thanks, Kalia. It's really useful. I don't see any other hands, Carol, but if not, are there any key gaps that, or any key reservations at this point around this specific theme? I'm happy if just to note what those are. If we can always go into greater depth at another stage, but yeah, just to get a sense from the group.
I don't think so, Matthew. The only issue that might come up as you go down go down further with it is a concern about revealing pricing strategy and discussing these issues in terms of competition.
So confidential, yeah. Thank you, Carol. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Great. Then thank you very much. I think we can move to the next slide. So the next one is on distributed value. And what we mean with this is that we're just thinking of the monetary and non-monetary flows of value involving an organization. So we know that when an organization enters the market, it's just either producing goods or providing services for the market, and it would receive compensation from customers for this, while other organizations may get compensated through taxes or tax relief or donations. But then there is also another side of this, which is basically where organizations would also be distributing value to stakeholders. This may be according to property rights or contractual obligations, etc. And in our view, both the receipt and the distribution of value could potentially have an impact on, I think very importantly, the public fiscus, depending on the nature of these flows, as well as on shareholders, workers, suppliers, and local communities again. So this is part of the reason why we thought it would be relevant to include this here. I think just to note that at present, this theme is largely captured in our current standards, so GRI 201 and economic performance, which is quite a popular standard in terms of organizations using it to disclose against. But we felt that there is still scope for us to potentially expand and or refine this standard. So I just wanted to get a sense from the group again, I think to start off with, does the idea of distributed value make sense? So just as an example of what's currently included in the direct economic value generated and distributed disclosure, an organization would disclose its direct economic value generated, such as revenues, as well as its value distributed, which can include operating costs, employee wages and benefits, payments to providers with capital and governments, amongst others. Is there a sense that this is something that we should retain and look to build upon? And if so, what are your thoughts on that? If there aren't any questions or thoughts, then I'll go ahead with asking my own questions as well, I think.
Why don't you ask your own questions while everybody's thinking, Matthew? I don't see any hands
Peter
up.
has his hand up. So
Peter, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Peter Colley here. Look, I think I actually submitted a written comment to this effect, but that the fact that this is actually one of the indicators that reporters like to report means it has use in the fact that reporters like reporting certain things is actually one reason to keep them. But my other point here is a more difficult one. I do agree with government subsidies being reported as in terms of value received. An issue that I ponder, and I don't know how to address it, and I think it might be too complex to address, is indirect subsidies that organisations receive, particularly organisations that say in the United States rely on very low wage labour, and those workers then receive government subsidies. And the business model of the organisation in part relies on the fact that there are public subsidies going to its workforce in order to sustain that workforce. But I don't know how readily or how possible it would be to quantify those government subsidies to the workforce as being something that the entity is benefiting from. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I think that's a good point that you raised. I think we had that discussion as well. So currently, as it stands, this would fall as part of Disclosure 201, so financial assistance received from the government. We are suggesting almost condensing the disclosures within GRI 201, so to include generated and received in one place. But again, this is open for discussion. I think with regard to the subsidies, that's something we can look into. If not, if disclosing this quantitatively is something that may be too complex or pose other kind of data or sensitivity or confidentiality issues, it may be something we can ask them to disclose qualitatively. So just the nature of these subsidies, who they're received from and what for, may be an alternative, but that point is noted. I think it was, and we'll look into that further on how this can be included. I'm not sure if there's any other questions.
Deborah.
Deborah, yeah, okay.
Hi there. I guess, I was just thinking around the idea of, we call it value generated and value distributed. And I would imagine that there's probably value distributed, there's probably monies being distributed that may not be valued or valuable. So things like, I don't know, political donations or lobbying costs. And I'm just wondering how that fits into this framework if there's money that's going out that's not really kind of benefiting the society or the world. And then similarly, things like if you're making investments for the future, so it's not, it's money being spent on sort of more capital type of goods, is that sort of included in sort of the value distributed, or is this really more a inflow outflow? And then my third question was on community investment, and you know, companies can do a lot of donations and say very nice things, but, you know, is there a sense that they need to sort of demonstrate how those monies being spent is actually having a positive impact on the communities?
Correct. Thanks, Deborah. All good points. I think the first one is something that I was going to touch on a bit later on. So around lobbying, I think that lobbying or political contributions are currently captured under GRI 415 public policy. So that's something, and that's an area that was a question mark for us. It's something that we thought would be relevant to include under within these revised economic disclosures because of the substantial economic impact that these kind of actions and contributions could have. So to your question, I think that's where we were still unsure. So on one hand, we as part of the theme I'll go through further down, it may be a case of asking organizations to describe you know, who these contributions are made towards, for what purpose, etc. But if we were to keep this idea of distributed value kind of one place almost where you can capture all these flows, and I think the benefit of this is that it almost provides a succinct and comprehensive profile for readers to kind of have an overview of this information in one place, and which informs other standards and other disclosures. Then I would say that those contributions we would need to see how they could be nested under the value distributed. So currently they don't fall under there. They captured within a separate standard. But that's something that we definitely would want to consider if we wanted to kind of catch all standard or disclosure for flows of value. And I think it's a similar question around, I think your second point was around capital investment and then community investment. So these themes and these issues, we've bundled them under kind of a separate idea, so more economic multiplier and governance. But yes, I mean, they strictly would, if you are making contributions to a community project or initiative or some capital infrastructure investment, that would be an outflow. So for us, it was something that we thought about, and we need to test with experts in the space whether it is feasible for us to ask organizations to disclose that information in one place under this kind of value generated and distributed framework. But it's something, yeah, that does come up and that we are considering. So I'm not sure if you have any advice or input around how whether that can be considered in a economic value generated distributed or gross value added model, or whether it needs to kind of be separate as well.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like this idea of a company sort of summarizing, you know, its economic impact in one place. It allows you to very clearly see how the company is, you know, contributing and sort of benefiting from sort of the communities and around it. So, you know, it was just more, are we capturing the right sort of pieces that go into that equation?
Yeah.
And then when I was kind of looking at the sort of the secondary impacts or sort of multiplier impacts, there was talk about sort of infrastructure investment, which is very specific type of sort of investment, and just wondering where the R&D, like it may not be an investment in R&D, but perhaps you're investing in equipments or you know, human capital development or things like that will pay back sort of over time, and so maybe we can leave that to when we talk about the sort of multiplier part of it, which again, that's where you're kind of capturing that longer term impact.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if I could just butt in now here, you've got 3 more themes to cover, I think, Matthew, and we've only got 10 minutes left for this slot. People can always put in written comments post the meeting, but perhaps if you could just really stick to the really key things that you want to get across on the next 3 themes, please.
Will do. Thanks, Carol. So we can move to the next slide. So I'll just go over quickly. I maybe won't open for comments at this stage, and then I'll ask a final question to the group. Job creation is the next theme. Essentially, it speaks to new, inclusive, and sustainable work opportunities that the organization is creating and the impact this has on the economy. We feel this is different from the employment disclosures, so keep in mind we are revising our labor standards. We can move to the next slide, please. So economic governance really speaks to the impact that organization has on the mechanisms that rule economic exchanges. So these can be through market mechanisms, Julian touched on anti-competitive behavior, or through rules and regulations such as public policy, anti-corruption. So this would be a place to kind of capture these ideas, which, to keep in mind, are already covered in existing standards. So we'd kind of bring them into one space. We can move to the next slide. No, I think that we missed one. Go back, please. No, we can go back. Yes, economic multipliers is what Deborah was speaking to. And yeah, this theme is really to try and more deliberately account for indirect and long-term effects that an organization would have on the broader economy. So through our engagements, there does seem to be a growing focus on indirect economic impacts. So along an organization's value chain, as well as capacity building, I think, which Deborah was alluding to, as opposed to kind of asking organizations to disclose, purely economic growth metrics, for instance. So this is quite an interesting one. As you can see here, we're including R&D as well as innovation, which I think would be really interesting. And then from our existing standards, GRI 203, it does look at kind of investment in infrastructure projects. So that is quite specific. So we may need to just broaden that a bit or make it a bit more general in order to cover different contexts. But that's essentially what this is trying to cover. It's these impacts beyond purely what an organization does around its own operations. So we can move into the next slide, please. So this is kind of the crux of what I wanted to cover today. It's the prioritization of these themes. So as you can see, I think this is quite a broad. It's a very broad topic, and we can go in a number of different directions. We would like to start to narrow in our focus over the coming weeks and months into areas where there's already a clearer path forward. There may already be a demand from the market and from practitioners, and where we kind of have a better sense conceptually of what we'd like to do. So keeping those kind of criteria in mind, this is what we're proposing. This is again not finalized, but based on the thinking around this, we feel that the issue or the theme of distributed value is something we can look to prioritize initially. It is fairly self-contained, as Peter alluded to. It is already widely used, and I think we do have a more clear idea of what we can do in this disclosure. The next one is economic multiplier. I think this is quite an important one, and it would already bring together what is, what would be covered in GRI 203 and 204 quite neatly. So procurement as well would be included in here, which I think is quite important. And as I said, we just feel that these issues of innovation, R&D, and how these gains are equitably shared is and kind of multiply or spill over through the economy is something that is quite important. The last three are perhaps we were less clear conceptually of how we take this forward. But I think these still are quite interesting and valuable impacts, topics that we'd like to consider. So I'll stop there and just give the group an opportunity to voice their thoughts around this prioritization, whether it makes sense, or any really critical reservations that the group may have on this.
Matthew, sorry, Matthew, just on the prioritization, shouldn't economic governance come somewhere close to distributive value? Because I'm just thinking it's almost the hygiene factors that are covered in economic governance that results or that leads to distributed value. So shouldn't that come maybe at number 2 is a question I had.
Thanks, Shalendra. I think it's a good point. And I mean, if that is a view shared, then we wouldn't be against doing that. I think our reservations were more around that it is something that we did struggle to define initially, and because a lot of what's captured in here is spread over a number of standards, both within the economic series and outside of it. It was just a consideration on how we coordinate that and whether that's something we could dive into. But your point around how it kind of complements distributed value is noted. So I mean, it is something we could look to shift forward as well.
Okay, can we move on then, Matthew? People can always submit any further comments in writing.
Great, thank you very much, Carol. Thank you to the GSSB members.
You had another couple of slides, I think.
Yeah, so if there's no further comments, the last slides are just process and next steps. So I'll be integrating the feedback we received today. We can go to the next slide, please. And into the draft proposal for submission for next month. I would also just like to take this opportunity to check if there are any GSSB members that would be willing or interested to act as a sponsor on this project, and just a sounding board to someone who's willing to kind of discuss some of these issues with the team kind of more bilaterally. I think that would be a really good way to kind of ensure we keep progressing with developing these issues. So we don't have to respond today, but if there is any interest in that, then please feel free to reach out to Jill or to myself directly. That's it from me, Carol. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And again, thank you for all the inputs.
Thank you, Matthew. And just one question on the idea of a sponsor. Is that for all the themes together, or can it be somebody different for different themes?
It can definitely be someone different for different themes, correct? Yeah.
Okay, so people might want to get in touch with you about their particular area of expertise in that. Then, so please,
that's perfectly
please
fine.
do
Yeah.
that, members, if you are interested. Thank you. So moving on, I think we have reached the end of the private session. Is that right? Yes. Is there any other business? Any other business for the public session? No. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to all the team for presenting, and we'll close the public meeting now and stay on the line for the private meeting. Thank you.
Recording stopped.